And I'm joined now by the chair of the Joint Parliamentary Intelligence Committee, Andrew Hastie. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Good evening, Sharri. Great to be with you.
Now, Andrew, these are really disturbing scenes coming out of the US. Businesses are being destroyed, reporters attacked, even arrested. There's shocking behaviour on the part of both the protesters and police, it seems. What do you make of all of this?
Well, very heartbreaking and disturbing footage of George Floyd's death during the week. And I'm very sympathetic to the outrage that many Americans, if not all Americans, are feeling right now. America is a creedal nation. It defines itself by its ideals. We all know the words of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal and can pursue life, liberty and happiness without interference. And so when people see those ideals quite literally crushed in the person of George Floyd, we shouldn't be surprised. The last 200 plus years of US history has really been about the country trying to live up to those ideals. So I'm very sympathetic, but it is disturbing. And I guess in a world of rapid change right now, where we really do need clear voices, particularly on issues like Hong Kong, this will soak up a lot of airtime, and America facing inwardly is not great for the rest of the world. So we hope that American society can reconcile itself soon and we can move through this.
Yeah, a lot of commentators are blaming the President Donald Trump, saying that he's stoked race divisions in the US. Do you think this is partly to blame for the outbreaks and that this is some disturbing new trend, or do you think we've seen these sort of racial divisions and protests every few years?
Yeah, look, I think people who jump to pointing fingers at the president or indeed either side of politics, miss the history of this. America's come a long way in the last 200 plus years. So these divisions do run deep, and it's events like this which really create these sorts of events that we're seeing around the United States. So look, this is bigger than one political leader or a Twitter handle, and that's why I said, I really hope American civil society can come together and move through this.
Yeah. Look, China's media mouthpiece, the Global Times, has published a series of articles attacking you and some of your colleagues like Tim Wilson and James Patterson. It calls your group extreme and attacks you for apparently spreading anti-China messages that it claims are from the United States about the coronavirus. It then goes on to warn that Australia could find itself involved in a Cold War, and that's a quote, due to cheap tricks from second-rate politicians. So I guess calling you a second-rate politician there. What is your response to this threat from Chinese media outlets that we could find ourselves in a Cold War and that you're to blame?
Well, we're all kind of flattered that, a couple of backbenchers can have so much influence. I don't think that's the case at all. It's actually a bipartisan attack because they include Labor Senator Kimberley Kitching as well. We're a bipartisan group of MPs, more than 20 now, who signed that letter in support of Maurice Payne and the government's position on Hong Kong, who are concerned about Australian sovereignty and free peoples around the world. So we won't be intimidated, we won't be silenced, and we'll keep doing what we're doing, and that is serving the Australian people by looking after our interests and values.
How worried do you think we need to be about this threat, and how seriously do you think we need to take it, that we could find ourselves in another Cold War scenario?
Very seriously, which is why the Prime Minister and his team have been navigating these tricky shoals very carefully. Our public rhetoric is very low key. It's not inflammatory at all. We're seeing it escalating in China and the US, and we've got to find a way through that serves our values and our interests and maintains our important alliances, particularly with the United States. And we also want to keep trading with China, of course. 1 in 3 export dollars goes to China. No one's talking about switching that off. But always we need to do things from a position of strength that serves our interests and our values as a democratic country.
Just on, you say your rhetoric has been very calm, but, does it ever concern you that you aren't entirely free to speak your mind because of the great offence that China will take, and that in a sense, Australia is forced to adopt their values of censorship in order not to offend them?
Well, I think the backbench particularly have demonstrated that we'll speak our mind, and that's what we can do in a Westminster system of government. When we speak, we're not speaking for the government necessarily. We're exercising our conscience and our freedoms, and we'll continue to do so, particularly as Liberal MPs. That's something we hold very dear. And so it's up to others to make the distinction between the government and the backbench. But certainly we're right behind the Prime Minister and his team. They've done a great job, and I'm optimistic about the chart that the course that we're charting.
Yeah, but basically you thoroughly reject the claims that you've inflamed tensions.
Absolutely, absolutely, and for them to suggest that somehow this is based in race is absolutely ridiculous. I've reminded people several times now that my father started a Mandarin Presbyterian church in Ashfield in Sydney. I had a man around my dinner table as growing up who was Chinese. My father baptized him, and he went back to China and was thrown in jail for handing out Bibles. So I've grown up in a community that was very Chinese. This accusation of racism is absolutely ridiculous, and I reject it entirely.
Look, the themes in some of these Global Times articles echo quite closely to some of the stories that have been run in the Australian media. Do you think that some media outlets over here are running the CCP propaganda line?
Well, Sharri, I think some commentators, some columnists, and I won't name them, have certainly contoured some of the arguments that we've seen from elsewhere. And that's why I'm so glad our government introduced the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme. People need to declare an interest, and we just want transparency. People can argue whatever they want. I'm all for free speech and for people exercising their point of view, but you need to declare who you're representing and why, and I think we need more of that.
Just to clarify, which media outlets are you saying should declare an interest?
I'm not saying media outlets should declare an interest. I'm saying individuals who want to enter the public square need to declare their interest. I'm a parliamentarian. I'm coming at it from a position as a parliamentarian, and if people want to put pen to paper or argue a position, they need to be clear about who they're representing and whether or not they have vested interests.
So if they've been employed by organisations linked to the Chinese government or received money, that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah. Look, I also want to ask you about the admission by Chinese scientists, in fact, the head of the Wuhan Centre for Disease Control, that the coronavirus didn't start in the wet market. This is quite a big revelation that's been, what a surprise, largely ignored by many in the media who have been very loath to admit that this could be a possibility. I don't know why they would take a position on where the virus may or may not have come from. Do you think this opens up the possibility that it did begin in a Wuhan lab?
Look, I think we have to be open-minded about all possibilities. I saw the clip that you played of Dennis Richardson just earlier. An independent inquiry must, by definition, take in all possibilities and then narrow down to the most likely plausible explanation for the origin of the coronavirus. And so this new development just demonstrates that we can't rush to any sort of judgment and that we should have an open mind. But an open mind is for closing, and we need to get on with this inquiry so that we can identify the lessons that we need to learn from this pandemic so we can mitigate the risk of it occurring again.
Well, also, I mean, a lot of scientists and governments also say that it is important to identify the origin of the virus in terms of not only preventing another pandemic, but helping to work on a vaccine and treatments. I just want to ask your opinion on this, Andrew Hastie. Why do you think this has become some ideological issue? I mean, you'd think if there is an investigation into the origins of a virus, it would sensibly and rationally look at all possibilities. What has happened in Australia where the left media have turned this into an ideological issue where they want to exclude one possibility?
That's a really good question, Sharri. Politics, it seems, is everywhere, including in the media. As far as I'm concerned, we should be open-minded and, we shouldn't jump to conclusions. So let's hope that this issue isn't weaponised any further and we get to the bottom of it.
Yeah. Look, there was also a story in the Sunday Telegraph and the Sunday papers, News Corp Sunday papers today by journalist Ellen Winnett. She's, of course, an excellent journalist. She wrote that Australian Special Forces soldiers have been served with formal notices accusing them of committing war crimes while fighting in Afghanistan. This is related to a 4-year investigation into rumours that Special Forces operators were involved in the unlawful killings and cruelty while in Afghanistan. Have you heard about this, that some SAS soldiers have been served these notices?
It's a really good question, Sharri. And firstly, I just want to say that this investigation has been running for 4 years now because SAS soldiers and other members of Special Operations Command blew the whistle and initiated this investigation. This has been driven by the diggers from the ground up, and that's really, really important. People of moral courage have stepped up. As to the report by Ellen Winnett today, this is an independent process, and therefore I don't know and I shouldn't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, because indeed this investigation has been running for 4 years. The Inspector General, his annual report was tabled in Parliament in February, and it detailed 55 examples that were being investigated of potential war crimes. So this is all about due process. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the letters had been served.
Yeah, look, there's been a lot of debate about this inquiry and others like it. Do you think this investigation is critically important to ensure Australian conduct, when fighting overseas, is beyond reproach? Or are you of the view that it's hard to determine an unlawful killing when you're outside of the heat of war?
If you serve Australia as a member of the ADF and you wear our flag on your shoulder, then you are accountable to the people who send you overseas. And so if wrong has been committed, then we need to account for it. This isn't an investigation that second guesses decisions made under pressure or in the heat of battle. Mistakes happen, that's war. Nothing is perfect, and even more so in high stress environments like war. So the Inspector General made it very clear in his annual report back in February that this was looking at only examples that would be considered cruelty to prisoners or extrajudicial killings outside the heat of battle. So it's very specific and limited in scope.